For most people, when we decide to stop drinking alcohol, they do it quietly. It's not something they want to talk about. It's not something they want to share with all their friends and loved ones. It's embarrassing, right? We never thought this is where we'd end up, and it's hard to accept that it is. We just want to quietly conquer the alcohol demon and get on with living our lives. Except that's not how it works. As we explore in this podcast episode, talking about it is exactly what we need to be doing. Talking about the things we're embarrassed and ashamed of is how we get to the other side of that shame and really start healing. It's how we connect with others in a meaningful way and finally fill that void that loneliness has been creating for so long. Vulnerability is the key to sobriety, and it's not talked about near enough. Listen as we chat with Jennifer, Michael, and Nicole about how vulnerability has made recovery from alcohol abuse a reality in our lives.
Welcome to Through the Glass Recovery podcast, where we believe that connection is the opposite of addiction, vulnerability is the antidote to shame, and that recovery isn't just rewarding, but it's also a lot of fun. We're your hosts, Julie and Steve. Listen as we get together with friends to shed light on the hard things, talk about the other side of addiction, and how we create a life so full there's no space left for alcohol.
If you're tired of being lonely while you navigate sobriety, come hang out with us on Zoom. I know it doesn't seem like Zoom could fill the need for connection, but you'll be pleasantly surprised. We've got a sober tribe waiting with arms wide open to accept you and support you while you find your way. To get more information about our weekly Zoom meetups, visit our website at throughtheglassrecovery.com.
All right. Hello and welcome, everybody. It's so nice to see your faces and so nice to see a couple of returning guests as well as somebody who's never been here before, which is always fun and exciting. It's really great to be here with you guys. This episode is going to be released at the end of week 2 of dry January. So a lot of our listeners right now are making it through, they're about halfway through dry January. And I think this is a really, really good, valuable, valid topic for that time. So before we dive into the topic, we will do some introductions. I'm going to let Mike start us off with intros.
Hi, my name is Mike, and I am with Sober Press. I've been sober since April 9, 2019, and I'm grateful to be here once again. Thank you so much.
Can you tell our listeners what Sober Press is all about?
Yes, absolutely. It's just me behind Sober Press, and on a daily, I try to push out something motivational, educational, or something enlightening or entertaining to my followers on Instagram. And then every other Sunday, I feature a recovery story on my website.
Yeah, it's fantastic. I love what you do. I actually got to be a part of that. I got to be featured on Mike's website. Was it?
Still waiting for me to reply for them. A year later, it's on the right side of the rock.
No, Steve, it's your speed's the best speed.
You bet.
No pressure. Why haven't you said anything? You said it.
I know. You're allowed to give me crap. That's fine. It's completely acceptable and valid.
Yeah, we will make sure that we include some links and stuff in our show notes so that you guys can catch up with Sober Press on Instagram and on the website. So yeah, thanks for being here, Mike. It's good to see you again. I'm gonna let Jennifer go next. Welcome back.
Well, thank you for having me back. What am I supposed to say again? Introduce myself?
Yes.
Sorry. It's just been a week. Anyway, yeah, I'm Jennifer, and when I got sober, I shifted my regular Instagram account to I used to be Dropkick Jen before I got sober, and then I just switched it over to sober. And yeah, I've been sober for 1,203 days. I know you said it didn't have to be specific, but I was already looking up the app, so. And yeah, I really just I'm glad to be here today and ready to talk about the topic.
Yeah, it's gonna be a good one.
Yep.
Thanks for being here. Jennifer was one of the first Instagram accounts that we ever followed when we started this podcast. So we have been stalking you for like 2.5 years now, which is awesome.
I also love the name Dropkick Sober.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
It's it's very punk rock, and it made me happy. I think that's why I was like, "Ooh, I pick her." So anyway, really good to have you back.
Thank
And last but not least, we have Nicole, who is here for the first time. Welcome.
Hi, I'm Nicole. I'm an alcoholic fanatic. My sober date is March 6th, 2022. So it's 2 years, 9 months, and like 6 days or something. Don't quote me. I'm in Nashville, Tennessee. I work as a peer recovery specialist. I work with individuals that are suffering from or living with, excuse me, let me mind my words, severe mental illness, extreme poverty and situations like that. And I'm very active in my recovery community here in Nashville. And yeah, and I do have a cool oh no, that's my Venmo, never mind. But social work doesn't pay much.
Awesome. Well, it's really neat to meet you. Really good to have you here. I'm really excited to hear what you have to share with us today. So, one of the things we say a lot here is vulnerability is the antidote to shame. When you first quit drinking, the shame can be nearly overwhelming. Talking about what you're feeling is the only way to start lifting the shame so you can work through things. It's also really hard to work up the courage to let people in, especially when you're used to staying silent and just drinking to drown out the shame. So, what has vulnerability looked like in your recovery? How has it helped you stay sober? And what advice would you give to someone who is still struggling with vulnerability? I think this is like a super valid topic for early recovery and, dry January, because I know for Steve and I, vulnerability was the answer to actually staying sober. And, you think you just put down the alcohol and get good at coping, but vulnerability was like the magic. So,
It
super
was
valid topic.
If it wasn't for vulnerability, I don't think I would have gotten good at coping.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
I may I?
Yes,
May I
please
jump?
do.
Gentlemen first. I would like to hear what you have to say.
Well, I mean, early in my sobriety, I learned right away that humility and vulnerability actually helped me along quite a bit. And sort of the core of vulnerability is allowing others to see you in a way that no one else has seen you, see you for your true self. And we always say the opposite of addiction is connection, but there is no connection unless you allow yourself to be vulnerable. And that was one of the things that I had to discover on my own. And with the help of a sponsor, you know, begin to cultivate that more and more and more as I went to meetings. And when I say vulnerability, it's the ability to, open up and tell your story and be able to relate to others and allow others, to see you. And it's scary as shit at first because no one wants to be out there. We've had this cloak and guard on for so long, in our addiction that, it's very difficult to get out there without that armor, so to speak. And early in addiction, it's the very thing, having that off and not having the guards is going to be the very thing that allows you to, thrive in a way.
Oh, for sure. Absolutely. Um, I don't know if I can just bust in. I don't know how this works. I haven't.
Just-
I'm gonna admit, I haven't listened to the podcast yet. I kind of wanted to be surprised. So
Now you are surprised.
I'm surprised. This is fun.
You just bust in. That's exactly what you do. There's free space. Bust in, Nicole.
Yeah, Nicole's here. Yeah, absolutely. I definitely agree with what you said. I was terrified of people, and like, the thought of going in and sharing in a room of others, let alone finding someone to, you know, be vulnerable with, one on one, as my program kind of just dictates. It's a suggestion that we should try. Huh, was like the last thing I wanted to do. First of all, I didn't realize that drugs and alcohol were my solution to a lot of problems, to all my problems. It worked until it didn't. And we couldn't discover those problems. I couldn't discover those problems until I did decide to be vulnerable. And my story is like, the person that I work with one on one, she did something really cool. She met me where I was, and which, my home space was my home turf, my house was my nest and is my nest. And she asked to come over and paint with me. And I think she felt that, I wasn't really being, honest and vulnerable with her. And that broke down a lot of walls. I mean, it was terrifying, absolutely. But that it did break open a lot of things, and it was a really good experience in hindsight.
That's really cool. It gave you a chance to feel a little bit safer and a little bit more seen and more human and stuff instead of just like sit down face to face, tell me all of your secrets and all of your problems, right? And like, no, that's a really valuable way to show up and connect. I think that's really neat. Really, really smart.
Well, I guess this is when I start saying something.
Go
If you would
Well,
like to.
So my train derails so easily. I battle with brain fog, so I had to okay, right. Yeah, for me, I wouldn't be able to be sober if I hadn't first learned how to be vulnerable enough to say, yeah, so this is how it is. I know you guys didn't know this was how it is, but about my drinking, because I was a high functioning alcoholic. Everybody was shocked. It's like, but really think about it. Don't be that shocked. But yeah, for vulnerability aspect, yeah, I guess for me, like, you can't really have a genuine relationship with anybody, not just a spouse, but friendship, whatever, unless you're being vulnerable. Because otherwise, you're you're just gonna have that surface level relationship that we all have with so many people. I mean, I'm a pretty heart on my sleeve kind of girl, but like, let's be real, not everybody gets full gen. So, yeah, I guess vulnerability was about just first being able to admit it to myself, to others, and, just and for me too, I made sure when I decided to stop drinking, I told everybody. Like, I told everybody close to me because I knew that would help me feel more accountable too. If they came back and they were like, "I thought you said you stopped drinking," you'd be like, "Shh."
I was like the dead opposite. I didn't tell anybody. Well, so when I quit the second time, which is this time, so the effective time, um, I showed up in a group of strangers, not AA, but kind of a different support group, but I actually showed up and talked about it. I didn't tell anybody else until I was at least a couple months in. Like, I was going to Zoom meetings. 3 or 4 times a week, and I told my family that it was an anxiety support group, and that's why it was really important for me, because I could not handle my husband and my teenagers knowing what I was really doing. So, I mean, I had the accountability in the group, and I had the people that I was talking to that were in that group, and that's a huge piece of it is the vulnerability. But it took me a couple of months to tell anyone in my real life what I was doing. Um, and I don't regret doing it that way because I wasn't ready. I was terrified. But I know like Jen, you said, and Steve too, you guys were like blasted it to the world when you decided it was time. And I stepped much more slowly into that.
I had no idea what I was doing when I was doing it. I was just like, I need help. I need support, but I don't know what that looks like. And that's literally what I told my immediate family. I have a problem. I need support from, I'm asking you for support, but I don't know what that looks like. I had no idea. That was my words to like 8 people.
Mm.
And I cried like a baby every time because that was vulnerable. One of the most vulnerable things to do is ask for help because it says, I don't know.
Mhm.
I don't know how to do this. I don't know how to get myself out of the mistakes that I've made. I don't know how to get myself out of the shame that I'm feeling. But I need something to stop. I need this mess that I'm feeling. It's almost torturous.
Mm.
I need it to stop. One of the 2 hardest things to do, the first hardest thing to do is ask for help, and the next hardest thing to do is figure out how to receive it. And that's vulnerable too.
Mhm.
Because that means I need to accept someone in and allow them control. And to give someone that control and trust, that means I'm accepting help. And I have to believe that they're going to come through without me trying to manipulate the situation so the result turns out the way I want it to be.
Mm.
Oh yeah.
So that's fucking vulnerable to let someone do their thing in hopes that it's going to work out for me too somehow.
Mhm.
Instead of me telling them this is how they're going to do it so it works out the way I want it to work out.
Mm.
And so for me, right at the beginning, vulnerability, that was the first step, is saying, this isn't working for me. I need to do something different. I need help.
Mhm.
And then saying, I don't even know what that help looks like, but I'm going to try. So it's completely ambiguous. And then showing up to a meeting, because that's what I did too, and then admitting to a whole bunch of other people that were strangers, which was also terrifying,
Mm.
that I had a freaking problem. And they were like, yeah, me too. I don't know. I was like, okay, tell me more. So the next meeting that I went to, I just floodgates came out. I finally found the courage to say some of the things that I just never found a safe place. Because I have written down here, where did you find a place to be vulnerable? Because I think that's important. And you don't find the place until you're vulnerable, and then you see where it lands. It's not like the other way around. Vulnerability rarely comes to you. You have to, vulnerability begets more vulnerability.
And that's kind
Go
of what
ahead.
Jen was saying in that, like, not everybody gets the real you, right? Like, people have to earn that. And you kind of throw a little bit of vulnerability out there and see how it lands and see what comes out of it. And then that kind of tells you, does this person really deserve more?
Mhm.
Or did it just fall flat? Did they just drop it? Did they say something hurtful back or whatever it is? And so I think we have to test people and decide where they belong, decide how close they're gonna get and how much we're really gonna share with them. I think that's important.
Right, absolutely. I agree. And that's why I chose to work with somebody that had been through some of the same things that I had been through, my say for example, I'm really close to my aunt here, and she knew my struggles and stuff, but however she doesn't know what it's like to use drugs and alcohol, as she knows what it's like to be she's not an alcoholic. She knows what it's like to have, you know, cravings for, like, chocolate, I guess. But, it's a much longer road to making your life unmanageable, eating a Snickers bar here and there, than it is, drinking every day and whatever. Um, so yeah, there are different people in my life, thankfully, that are for different levels of vulnerability. But the first person, I mean, I tell the newcomer, or the person just trying the waters out of sobriety, is find somebody, if you can, that has gotten through and over, their obsession with alcohol or drugs or whatever, you know, um, because they understand how to be there for you.
For Steve and I, it was actually so Steve's like 6 months sober 6 months longer than me. And he was the first person I ever talked to, like really talked to. I mean, I showed up at meetings, and talked a little bit. But then and I think that going to finding any recovery community is really valuable, because then you can find a person or two that you feel like you really connect with. And so we sent a couple of like text messages back and forth, and that turned into my safe place. And he wasn't like super experienced, but it was still a safe place to just talk about it. Somebody who, and for me, it was somebody who was going through it at the same time. But I think that somebody who gets the struggle from wherever, whether it's because they did it before or because they're in it right now, that is really valuable.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely.
Michael's throwing stuff around in his kitchen,
Oh, that's fine. Don't
He forgot to mute himself.
which is fine. Chasing his dog around without his pants on because we're on Zoom.
Are you all right, buddy?
I'm fine. I had to go get a refill on my water.
He turned his camera off because it was vulnerable.
I didn't want to be vulnerable in front of you guys.
Are you vulnerable in your boxer shorts?
Hmm.
I don't know if it's cold where you are, but anyway.
I'm in Austin, and for Austin, it's cold.
All right. Well, good.
Julie's saying, reel it in.
Now, what are your thoughts, Mike? What's going through your head?
So, there's a lot going on in my head, and honestly, the ability to actually share in a very genuine and authentic way, actually takes a lot of courage, and vulnerability takes a lot of courage, and I feel like the return on being vulnerable comes back in spades, and a lot of times within kind of the way we reason and the way we think, we're already prejudging, ourselves. But we have to consider the environments where we're going to be sharing, where we're going to be, actually allowing people in. And a lot of it is within meetings, group discussions, Zoom meetings, that kind of thing. So you're going to be surrounded by like-minded people already, people that are ready to accept you for who you are, and they're ready to come to the table in a non-judgy way. So I found that the more meetings I went to and the more Zoom meetings and things like that, I actually got better and better at sharing simply because, a lot of the preconceived notions that I came to the table with didn't really include the thought that, I'm talking to people who are of like minds, people who've been through it before. And, we have that common ground, and that's so important to remember because early in sobriety, we feel isolated. We feel alone because we were a lot of times, within our darkest and deepest, sort of addiction. It's a period of isolation, and, uh, we're coming out in a way, and we're coming out in the sense of we're rediscovering ourselves. So we're feeling pretty raw. Um, but what's great about being vulnerable, it allows us to be seen. And I think the very first step to actually healing is to be seen and heard, you know? And you know, when we're seen and heard, we're actually beginning the process of healing. And healing doesn't always mean feeling great, You kind of have to feel uncomfortable in a way, and you have to feel the pain for what it is, you know. This notion of sometimes you have to stop and, feel the thorns, and the posts look like a very thorny rose patch, if you will. And, it's kind of moving through the briars in order to get to the sweet spot of life, You have to push through it. And a lot of it, you know, we create those briars in our mind. And, you know, the painful and sticky part of life is usually the only way through it is actually to go through it and feel it for what it is. And when you make it to the other side, so to speak, you can actually breathe a sigh of relief and reflect, wow, I made it. And, by the way, when you made it, it could just be like that one step, or it could just be, that one leg of the journey. We never really make it, quote unquote, air quotes, excuse my air quote, but it's a lifelong journey of discovery, and a lot of it is vulnerability and allowing ourselves to discover and be discovered.
Mhm. I think too, it's important that we talk a little bit about vulnerability in our relationships because, or just in general, not just in the sense of coming out as I have a problem, but also the vulnerability. Vulnerability is what creates connection in any instance, whether it's about the fact that you're struggling with alcohol, or it's the fact that you are struggling with self-worth, or, you're ashamed of this thing in your past, or whatever it is. Like, Steve and I have this song that we love. It's by Andy Grammer, and it's called "The Good Parts." And one of the lines is to say the words that burn when they leave your mouth. That is vulnerability. Anytime there's something you want to say to someone and it's really hard to say it, that is vulnerability. And almost always, saying it is where the growth happens. Saying it is where the healing happens. That's where the connection happens. That's where all of the good stuff happens. We all are just so used to holding it in and protecting, like trying to protect ourselves from ever feeling pain, right? But then in addition, we're stopping ourselves from healing or from growing or from connecting with other people. So I guess I'd be really curious to hear from you guys. Like, how has vulnerability shown up in your life in ways that has improved it or allowed you to grow or connect in greater ways?
Well, I read somewhere that vulnerability enhances resilience in the face of challenge, something to the effect of empowering individuals to navigate setbacks with courage and confidence.
We
And I was like, yeah, that definitely hits home. Because, yeah, it's not just sobriety that it's important to be vulnerable, like, really to have any true connection with anybody. You have to if you're not vulnerable, then, you might not be being very genuine,
Mm.
and people pick up on that, and
For sure.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, it really is an uncomfortable place. And you know, what's ironic though is it strengthens dimensionally, So when you are being vulnerable, you're being authentic. And those are the relationships that allow themselves to bond. Um,
Mm.
because you can't have a proper relationship without a genuine bond, an authentic one, and that takes vulnerability. It's that metaphor of you have to scrape the wood in order to, get the glue on to get a good bond. So
Right.
it's that part of the uncomfortable part that allows you to actually accept someone else and be accepted. And it's a key part of, you know, having a connection because you can't really have a deep connection without, being vulnerable first, and that's being true and being honest with yourself and the person that you're connecting with.
I'm going to piggyback on connection for a minute because I thought I had connection before. I thought I had connection before I quit drinking with the people at the bar, with the people I was drinking with basically everyone at some point. I would drink enough to feel like I was connecting with them. As you laugh. It's true. I would drink enough to feel like I was finally getting to that point where, I had the guts to tell the truth. And in those instances, I wasn't really connecting with anyone because I wasn't a party to the conversation. They were just a party to the words that were coming out of my mouth.
Mm.
Yeah.
And so that's a one-way conversation. That's a one-way street. Connection's two ways. There's a give and a take on both sides. And it's an exchange of energy, if you want to even look at it that way. But I'm going to simplify this even more. Is it the one thing I wanted so fucking bad was for someone to show up for me. I wanted someone to show up for me. The only way for that to happen, the only way, like at 2 weeks, the only way for that to happen is I needed to be vulnerable. I needed to start telling my truth, vulnerability and truth. Let's go with truth. I needed to start telling the truth for someone to show up for me in a way I needed them to show up.
Mm-hmm.
Hmm.
Yeah.
So at 2 weeks, because I didn't know my ass from the hole in the ground. I didn't. But I knew one thing. I knew my truth, and that was the one thing I was deathly afraid. I was afraid of my truth. I was afraid to tell that to somebody because it was buried in shame.
Mm-hmm.
And so for me to get what I wanted love, I wanted to be loved, I wanted to be cared for, I wanted all of these good, warm feelings. They don't come without me telling my truth. They don't come without me being vulnerable, and they don't come without me trying.
Absolutely.
Mm-hmm.
that makes a lot of sense. It's a lot like vulnerability is the work we put into sobriety, like the work we put into the gym. It's hard. Sometimes it's really embarrassing because maybe we're really out of shape or whatever.
Mm-hmm.
But you can't get to where you want to go if your goal is to get more fit or like to be able to be stronger, to be faster or whatever. If you don't put in work, and vulnerability is like that first important thing you have to, because you can't admit you have a problem without being vulnerable. You can't do so many things without being vulnerable. So,
Mm-hmm.
I honestly, I didn't find myself, my true self, until I was it, and as whole, like I said, it didn't happen right away. But until I started practicing and building that vulnerable muscle, um, you know, um, I had been wearing a mask for years, and and I didn't even know who I was. And yeah, it's been a beautiful thing, even though it is not cute a lot of the times. I remember like the first time I was actually like really vulnerable. Ugh, I've said it so many times that it's just,
Is English as a second language for you too today? Because that's okay.
it's fine. Um, I know words. So yeah, I remember at one point, and this was after some time being sober, that I had to tell a friend like really, really how I felt about like our relationship, how it was going, and like
Mm.
either how she was treating me, or my perception of it. And I was terrified, and she actually thanked me for that, and that blew me away. I was like, "What?" She's like, "Yeah, like, thank you for calling me out," you know? And, and that has, like you said, strengthened our relationship for sure.
That right there is where the magic is. It's
Mhm.
when you speak up, like, and for a lot of us, we were really good at being kind of doormats, right? So speaking up when someone is treating you in a way that is not working for you, that's vulnerable. But when you do the vulnerable thing, something good happens. Like your life improves in some way, usually. Hopefully, that's not they just bail on the entire relationship. But I mean, like, I think that that's a really important piece of vulnerability is speaking up and saying the things to people that they probably don't want to hear because otherwise we're just letting them dump all over us and then we're building resentment. So, like, vulnerability literally is just if it's hard to say, it's vulnerable. And after you say it, things are gonna get better in some way or another. There's gonna be change.
Oh, for sure.
Yeah, that's a great example.
So I think I'm gonna wrap this up. The interesting thing about vulnerability is when we hear ourselves speak, it's like hearing the truth that we were afraid to believe.
Mm,
Mhm.
It stays silent. And Julie, you mentioned the if it's hard to say, it's likely worth saying because in vulnerability, we get to learn about other people as well as learning about ourselves.
Mhm.
We get to learn where it can be accepted and where it won't be accepted. And then we get to figure out what to do with it. And
mm,
that in itself is scary. But we talked about that it takes courage. The more you do it, the easier it gets. So the more I am vulnerable with Mike, the more I learn about Mike, the more I become more comfortable with telling Mike some of the things that maybe I wouldn't tell anybody else. Right? And I also get trust. It was one of those other things in recovery that I wanted so bad. I just wanted somebody to trust me, but I have to give something to get it.
Mhm.
for sure.
I have to give the vulnerability to get it back.
Mhm.
And so it's a trade-off. And Michael, I loved what you said. Sometimes you have to stop and feel the thorns.
Mhm.
And if I could write down what you said, Jennifer, I would have said, or I would say it again, but you said it so dang fast that it doesn't really matter. But it was pretty awesome. So I want to say thank you, Nicole. Thank you, Jennifer. And thank you, Michael, for being here and sharing your thoughts on vulnerability. I really hope that our listeners heard something that they can latch on to something. And if you're looking for places to speak to someone that is going through or has been through something like what you're going through right now, if you're on week 2 and you need a place to speak, you can reach out to any of us. We
Yes.
can I know all of you will gladly show up for somebody in the way you wished somebody could show up for you.
For sure.
Absolutely.
And that's why we're all here. That is absolutely why we're all here, is to show up for somebody else the way we wish somebody could for us, and somebody has done that for us. So I want to say thank you guys. I really appreciate your time.
Awesome. Thank you.
Thank you, Steve. Thank you, Julie.
Yeah, thanks for being here, you guys. Thanks for sharing your time with us today. As always, we just want to remind you to like, subscribe, or follow Through the Glass Recovery podcast on whatever app you're using to listen. It helps us reach more people just like you. Thanks again, and we will see you next week.